Raymond Moody was a skeptic, a physician, a man with 2 academic degrees who knew how the dying brain works and why it sometimes creates vivid imagery. He had heard stories about tunnels and light before, and he always found an explanation. Until one day in 1965, when he sat in a lecture at the University of Virginia and a professor of psychiatry stepped up to the podium and began to speak. Moody listened for 5 minutes, 10, 20, and realized that not one of his explanations worked, because what this man was describing was too specific, too verifiable, too detailed to be a hallucination of a dying brain. The professor's name was George Ritchie, and what he was describing had happened to him in December 1943, when a military physician signed his death certificate, and 9 minutes later, a hospital orderly saw movement under the sheet. That single case is what drove Moody to spend the next 50 years collecting similar stories. That case is what produced the book Life After Life. That case is what gave us the term NDE, and that case is why today we know anything at all about what happens after death. It all began with one soldier, and with one skeptic who couldn't find an explanation. Stay with me, because what Ritchie saw during those 9 minutes was not just a tunnel and a light. He saw a structure, specific, multi-layered, with details that 50 years later matched what thousands of other people described, people who had never heard of each other. December 1943, Camp Barkley, Texas. 20-year-old U.S. Army Private George Ritchie was admitted to a military hospital in critical condition. Double pneumonia in the pre-antibiotic era was often a death sentence. His lungs were failing. His temperature reached a critical level. The duty physician entered the ward and found neither pulse nor breathing. The pupils didn't respond to light. He did what he was obligated to do. He signed the official death certificate. The body was covered with a sheet. An orderly came to prepare it for transport and saw a hand move. Ritchie was alive. How the doctors couldn't explain. His condition on admission had left no room for hope. The death certificate existed physically in his military file, and this is not a metaphor. It is a document that later became one of the confirmations of his case. The first thing he said when he regained consciousness was not about pain and not about weakness. He asked, "How long was I gone?" Not what happened to me. Specifically, how long was I gone? Like a man who knows he left somewhere and came back. What he described afterward, consistently, without changes, without contradictions for 50 years, did not begin with a tunnel. It began with the corridor of a military hospital. He described leaving his body and finding himself standing in the corridor. Not the sensation of leaving, literally standing. He saw his body in the ward from above. He saw the nurses. He saw the details of the room from a position physically impossible for a man lying unconscious. His first thought was not about death. He remembered that he was supposed to report to another camp the following day for a medical examination, and he tried to get there. And he described flying over nighttime Texas, seeing roads, a small town, a diner with its lights on, a railroad bridge over a river. In 1988, researchers attempted to verify these descriptions. They found the bridge, they found the diner, the locations matched. Then he stopped. Not because he wanted to, something stopped him. And then the light appeared. Not brightness. A source that could not be located because it was everywhere simultaneously. And from this light emerged a figure. Ritchie recognized it not by appearance, by feeling, by the fact that this being knew everything about him, every moment of his life, every thought, every decision, and judged not a single one of them. He tried to describe this for 50 years, and every single time fell silent for a few seconds partway through, as if words kept turning out to be smaller than what he was talking about. The being asked him one question, without words, directly into his consciousness. What have you done with your life that you can show me? Not were you a good person. Specifically, what exactly did you do? Ritchie described feeling something close to shame in that moment, not because he was being judged, but because he himself saw the gap between who he was and who he could have been. This was not a trial. It was a mirror, with no possibility of looking away, no possibility of explaining, just you and your life, all of it, all at once. Then the being showed him something he hadn't expected. He didn't just see light and feel peace. He saw a structure, a specific, multi-layered structure of what happens to consciousness after death. And it is this part of his account, the part Moody sat listening to without breathing in 1965, that separates Ritchie's case from the majority of other NDE testimonies before and after it. The first level, souls who don't know they're dead. Literally, people continuing to do what they did during their lives, attached to familiar places, trying to interact with the living and not understanding why it isn't working. Ritchie described a specific scene, a bar, men drinking, talking, playing cards, and around them, other figures, transparent, desperately trying to get the attention of the living, reaching for glasses they can't pick up, trying to speak and getting no response, touching people and passing straight through. Complete invisibility to the living, not because the living are cruel, because the living simply can't see them. Ritchie described this not as a frightening place, as a place of being stuck. Not punishment, simply the impossibility of moving forward when all attention is directed backward toward what was left on the other side. The second level, her state of inner conflict. There was no external war here. Each person was imprisoned in their own reality, built from their own thoughts. People literally reliving the same scenes over and over, resentments, hatreds, old conflicts that were never resolved, with no way out, with no rest. Ritchie described this as the darkest thing he saw, not because anyone was holding them there, but because each person was holding themselves. The source of the prison was the person themselves. And an exit existed, but it required the one thing they had spent their whole lives avoiding: letting go. The third level, work, not in the sense of compulsion, in the sense of creativity without the limitations a physical body imposes. Beings engaged in something that resembled research, only without exhaustion, without the need to eat or sleep, without the constraints of time or space. Ritchie described this as what human science would become if you removed all of biology from it. Pure concentration, pure creation, pure speed of thought with no delay from the physical world. The fourth level, what he could only describe with one word: home. Not because this place resembled anything from his life, but because it held a feeling he had spent his entire previous life searching for and never finding in its fullness. Absolute acceptance, without conditions, without the need to prove anything. Without the fear of being rejected if he turned out to be not good enough. Simply, you are here, and this is right. He described this feeling as what people search for their whole lives in love, in recognition, in success, and never find in full here. Because here it is always partial. There, it is complete. Then they sent him back, without asking. He didn't want to return. He said afterward that it was like being pulled from the most real moment that had ever happened, back into pain, into weakness, into a body that barely worked. He woke up in a military hospital, with a signed death certificate in his personal file, and with memories that had not faded in 1 year or 20 or 50. When Moody heard this story in 1965, he did something he didn't expect of himself. He couldn't find an explanation. So he started looking for similar cases, quietly, methodically. Alongside his work as a physician and his teaching at the university, he collected stories. By 1975, he had 150 documented cases. He published them in a book called Life After Life. In the first year, more than 1 million copies sold. The term NDE appeared. A field of research appeared that had not previously existed. Thousands of people around the world finally received a name for what they had been through, and had stayed silent about for years because they were afraid no one would believe them. All of it, every book, every study, every case documented after 1975, traces back to one lecture in Virginia in 1965, to one skeptic who couldn't find an explanation, and to one soldier in a Texas military ward who 9 minutes after his death certificate was signed, moved under the sheet. Ritchie lived another 60 years. He became a psychiatrist, a professor. He founded organizations to help the homeless and people struggling with addiction. The direct result of the question he heard there, "What have you done with your life that you can show me?" Moody once said of him, Of all the people I have met in 50 years of work, George Ritchie is the only one whose story fully explains why I devoted my life to this. If not for him, this field of research might not exist at all. One final question, the one Ritchie carried for 60 years, not as a threat, as a compass. What have you done with your life that you can show? Write in the comments, if that question were asked of you right now and you had to answer honestly, what would you name first?